Go.
Welcome to Inside the History, and we're here live on the road on the USS Salem in Quincy, Massachusetts at the former Fore River Shipyard, where both Battleship Massachusetts and Destroyer Kennedy was built. I'm Thomas James Lowney, Gunner's Mate First Class, retired with Dr. John Scholes, and we're here to give you an inside history in both the USS Salem, naval history, and the Fore River Shipyard as well. So we can take you for a walking tour inside the gun turrets, through the magazines, through some of the control spaces, and give you an insight into the history of here at the Fore River Shipyard, where history has been made in Massachusetts and building some of the best ships in the world. And Salem being the last all-gun heavy cruiser built by the United States, and still the last all-gun heavy cruiser still in existence in the world. So, thank you for joining us. We're about to go on board. We'll see you there. We'll give you insight of the history. Thank you. Welcome back to Inside the History, Battleship Cove. Today we're doing a visual inspection and going through the history of the turrets on the USS Salem in Quincy, Massachusetts. And Dr. John Scholes is joining me here, and he will be going over the turret systems. He's more familiar with it than I am, and he can give you quite more information off the cuff than I could. So, Dr. Scholes, thank you for joining us again and giving us your time to go over turret 2 here and the ins and outs of the 8-inch 55 auto system.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Tom, and thanks for coming on board the Salem and helping us do this tour. I'd like to recognize all the people from historic ships that are here, from the Massachusetts, from the New Jersey, and from the Missouri.
It's great for them to join us. Welcome. Thank you.
So we are now standing in the turret officer's booth, where the control of the turret is performed in the 8-inch 55 rapid-fire 3-gun turret. As in the 16-inch turrets of the battleships, including the Massachusetts, these are 3-gun, not triple turrets, because each gun can elevate independently of the other. This turret is why the USS Salem and her sisters was built. And it was based, really, the need for it, on the experiences of the U.S. Navy in surface battles between cruisers and destroyers around the island of Guadalcanal in World War II. The U.S. Navy was actually somewhat disappointed in the performance of its cruisers in those battles, particularly of the 8-inch gun heavy cruisers. The 8-inch gun at that time was a bag gun. That is, the powder was contained in silk bags, much like the bag guns of the 16-inch guns of the battleships, including the Massachusetts. This limited the rate of fire to 3 to 4 rounds a minute at best. The light cruisers of the U.S. Navy used case guns, that is, the powder charge is contained in a brass case, and they were able to fire much more rapidly with the 6-inch 47 gun that was mounted on the light cruisers. And they could reach a firing rate of 8 to 10 rounds per minute, at least for short periods. However, the armor-piercing projectile for the 6-inch gun weighed only 130 pounds, and for these guns it weighs 335 pounds. So it was much more limited in its penetrating power, and it also contained a much smaller charge of explosive, so it did less damage. It also did not have as much range as the 8-inch gun, and the rate of fire was actually slowed for the 6-inch guns when you tried to fire at ranges over about 16,000 yards. So the Navy wanted a solution to this problem to defeat Japanese ships in night actions where there was rapid maneuver and one oftentimes only had a short period of time to fire at a target, and one had to really knock it out very quickly once one was able to fire at it.
Limited opportunities.
So they decided that they would design a 8-inch gun that would fire as rapidly, if not more rapidly, than a 6-inch gun. And that this would give the advantages of both. In order to do this with ammunition as heavy as is fired by this turret, the armor-piercing shell again weighs 335 pounds, the high-capacity shell weighs 260 pounds, and a full-charge brass powder case weighs 140 pounds. This ammunition is much too heavy to move manually, and therefore everything has to be moved by power, and that requires automation. Needless to say, this was a very radical development, especially as in the time when this gun was first designed, beginning in July 1943. The largest automatic gun in the world was a 40mm Bofors. So this was one heck of a jump to an 8-inch caliber. In order to do this, the Navy felt that they had to develop a prototype and test it because there was serious concern that this might not be a reliable system. That's part of the reason why it's a 3-gun turret and not a triple turret, because if one gun malfunctioned, the other two would still be able to fire. They also decided that they were going to develop a prototype first before they built the actual production models. And so the Philadelphia Navy Yard was actually commissioned to develop a prototype that only had 2 guns in it, the 2 outer right and left guns. The center gun was omitted. And this was sent to the Naval Proving Ground in Dalton, Virginia, and it was tested. In order to test it, they went very, very far, and they really proved that the gun would work. One test that they did was to test the automatic loading mechanism, and they tested it for 15,000 cycles without a malfunction. And then after they did that, they did it again to prove that it would actually work. They were also concerned that firing shells as fast as this gun fires them, and each gun fires a round every 6 seconds, or 10 rounds a minute. And again, we're talking about a 335-pound projectile propelled by a 78 or 83-pound powder charge. They thought, well, these guns may get awfully hot. Well, they get so hot that the steel in the guns will begin to soften and melt. So they rigged up the guns with thermocouples to measure the temperature, and then they proceeded to fire 100 rounds at the maximum rate of fire of full charge armor-piercing ammunition. And they kept monitoring the heat. Well, at the end of that, they had had no malfunctions, and the temperatures of the guns were only a little over 300 degrees, which was well within the limits of what the steel would take without softening.
Impressive.
So they proved that the guns would be reliable then. And then they did it again, just to make sure that they had it right. Did all this testing actually prove out in service? Well, I was fortunate enough to be given a copy of a cruise book of the USS Newport News that also had this same turret. First cruise in Vietnam. And during that cruise, in about 6 months, they fired over 21,000 rounds of 8-inch ammunition. They had no malfunctions. So these guns, despite their complexity, proved to be very, very reliable indeed. As I mentioned, we are standing in the turret officer's booth where the control of these guns was performed. The normal crew in this booth would include 3 gun captains, each of which would stand at this gun captain's control panel and station. There would be a turret officer, who was the officer in control of the turret. A turret captain would be usually a chief petty officer in control of the crew and supervising. There would also be a computer operator. When these ships were originally built, they had 2 Mark 27 ranging radars in the turret, so there would be a radar operator, and there would be about 2 or 3 talkers in addition to relay information from the turret to other spaces and to receive information from other spaces to the turret. The first piece of equipment here in the turret officer's booth that we're going to look at is the gun captain's control panel. And there's one of these for each of the 3 guns. And the gun captain would stand here, his assistant, and there usually were either 2 or 3 assistants with him. You could also do this because the assistants were often training for the position of becoming the gun captain. At this panel, you're going to notice this little lever here that says retract and ram. This is actually a dead man switch. And in order to operate the gun captain had to hold this lever back in the ram position. If anything went wrong and the gun captain saw it, or if there was any malfunction indicated on these indicator lights that track the whole process of the gun loading sequence, you simply let go of the handle snapped forward, and the entire process shut down automatically. All right, this rack contains what are called short cases. They're actually a special short powder case that's about half the length of the regular powder charge, and they're here for one purpose and one purpose only, and that is if one had a round in which the powder case would not fire, even with several backup mechanisms that occur, these cases would be used to fire the shell out to clear the gun. Basically, the regular powder charge that had malfunctioned would be ejected out of the gun, and then these cases would be manually placed on the loading tray and rammed, and these are primed with a combination primer, both electric and percussion. So if the electric firing mechanism would not fire, you could rig up a lanyard and the old-fashioned way and hit it with a hammer and set off the percussion primer to get that shell out of the barrel so you could resume firing with that gun. These are very, very rare, very few in existence. The only ones that I know of are on this ship.
Okay.
This panel is the turret fire control switchboard. This would be controlled by the turret officer and the turret captain, and basically sets up how this turret is going to be controlled. Now, normally this would be controlled through the main fire control system, running through the main battery plotting rooms, but alternatively, it could be controlled directly from the Mark 54 director aloft, either the forward or aft spot 1 or spot 2. It could be controlled by any of the 4 Mark 37 secondary directors, sky 1 through 4. It also could be controlled locally with a computer in this space, and when this turret had the Mark 27 radars in it, it also had its own radar that could control the turret. This turret also could control turret 1 and turret 3 through what they called high turret control. All of this could be programmed on this fire control switchboard.
Okay, go ahead.
This is a drilled projectile for the 8-inch 55 rapid fire gun. It's the same drill projectile that was also used on the Baltimore and Oregon City class cruisers for their bag-loaded 8-inch guns. You'll notice that it has a very blunt, flat nose, That's because this projectile is not designed to be fired. It is merely a drill round for training and for testing. This would be rammed into the gun by the power rammer, and the driving bands would then engage the rifling. Well, when that happens, the shell is very firmly wedged into the barrel. Now, this is not going to be fired, so there's no powder charge to push it out the barrel. How do you get it back out so you can shoot real rounds? Well, there was actually a rope and pulley device that clamped onto the muzzle of the gun, and it contained a large weight wrapped in rope, which, when you elevated the gun, would then be dropped. It would hit this flat nose and knock it back out of the gun. Then it could be lifted off the tray, and the gun could resume firing real projectiles. As we mentioned, the 8-inch 55 is a case gun, not a bag gun. This is a drill case for training and testing. You'll notice it's made out of wood, but it is the same size and the same weight as the full charge regular powder case weighing 140 pounds. The actual brass case that is used in these guns weighs 57 pounds, and the normal full charge powder charge is 78 pounds or 83 pounds if it's a flashless charge. This cap here is kind of made out of a Bakelite plastic, and it's the same one that you would see in the real round. As we mentioned before, these guns were normally controlled through the main battery fire control system, through the director's aloft, and through the forward or after main battery plotting rooms. However, in case of loss of communication with them, or damage or failure, this turret could control itself entirely independently. And this is the fire control computer that they would use. It is much smaller and more simplified than the normal Mark 8 fire control computer that is down in the plotting rooms, but it is capable of controlling the turret in local control and would be able to provide a fire control solution at least within limited ranges. For picking up the target, the turret officer and turret captain have periscopes that they can use to optically spot the target. They can estimate range, and that can be cranked into this computer. When they had the Mark 27 fire control radars in the turret, that could be used to provide ranges and bearings to this fire control computer so that they could set up a fire control solution. They could also, by voice, be phoned information on range and bearing of a target, and they could use that and crank it into the computer as well. And there would be a computer operator here during exercises or in action, although this would not normally be controlling the turret in case of a casualty, unless in case of a casualty. They would be continually calculating the solution so they could instantly change over to this if there was a failure. Okay, I'm now standing by the panels where the turret captain and the turret officer would be standing. They have a number of lights indicating status of the guns, fire control orders coming from gunnery central and from the forward and aft main battery plotting rooms. They have turret train indicators, and this one actually has train indicators not only for this turret, but for the other two turrets because this turret could control turret 1 and turret 3 in an emergency. Here we have a sound-powered phone. They also had phones for communication. And these guns, although normally they were fired from the plotting rooms and the stable verticals, if necessary, they could be fired locally from the turret, and this is the firing key. This table could be used for plotting in case of this turret having to take over the fire control problem and the control of either this one turret locally or all three turrets in case of emergency. That's all we need to say about that one. This is the turret officer's control position. He has a phone to communicate with all other parts of the ship that are involved in firing the guns. He has a switch panel, and he has an indicator panel indicating the status of the guns in this turret. And he can also get information about the status of turret 1 and 3 if this turret is going to be used to control the other two turrets. Okay, now we come to the point of the turret, which is the 8-inch 55 rapid-fire gun. And let's take a look at the loading mechanism. If you look at the breech block, you'll notice that unlike the 16-inch guns that you may be familiar with, there is no interrupted screw breech. These guns use a sliding wedge breech which moves up and down vertically and opens and closes automatically. You'll see a tray there, but that tray is only to receive the empty powder case when it is ejected by that yoke mechanism that you see on top of the breech block. How does the ammunition get from down below up into these guns? Well, forward of the projectile tray, beneath that bronze wheel, which is the manual breech opening lever, and forward of the powder tray, there is a cradle mechanism which rocks back and forth on the trunnions of the gun. When a projectile or a powder case comes up on the hoist from down below, it locks and latches into that cradle, which then swings back and latches onto the slide of the gun. When it locks, it then releases, and there is a spring that has been compressed in the cradle, which then literally spits the projectile and the powder case back into the projectile transfer tray and the powder transfer tray. These trays then, once they're loaded with the projectile and the powder case, rock together in the center. They pivot and they line up. So there's a straight line from the back of the powder case to the projectile, into the housing, and then into the, across the breech block, open, of course, into the gun. The rammer is seen there with the black head and the bronze tray over it, and that rams both the powder case and the projectile in one stroke into the gun, and it does so very rapidly because it accelerates to a speed of 10 feet per second. So the whole loading sequence of ramming and retracting the rammer takes about 2 seconds. Once the rammer is retracted, the powder trays, the transfer trays for the projectile and the powder, rotate out of the way back to the position in which you see them now. The breech block automatically closes, and if all other things are clear in the firing circuit, the gun automatically fires. The gun then recoils, counter recoils, the breech block drops, the yoke mechanism then spits the empty powder case out onto the tray that you see there. By that time, the projectile tray and the powder tray, transfer tray, have been reloaded. They fold in again, and the empty powder case tray folds down and dumps the empty powder case into a chute below the gun. It is then pushed forward and comes out below the barrel. A little hatch opens sideways, and it falls out onto the deck or onto a tray to catch it with the empty powder case. This entire sequence takes place in 6 seconds. It occurs at any elevation. Unlike the bag-loaded guns, which have to be lowered to a loading angle, 5 degrees in the 16-inch, about 10 degrees in the 8-inch 55, to be loaded. This is not necessary here. The gun keeps loading no matter what angle of elevation it's at. It also is a fully automatic gun. That is, if all the firing control circuits are closed and there are shells and powder cases in the hoist, the gun just continues to fire at that rate until either a ceasefire is ordered or you run out of ammunition. Other things that you'll see here, you'll notice this big square box here with those plates on top of it. That's actually a weight box, and it's to counterbalance the gun so that it elevates easily because it's in balance. And you can actually unscrew those and add extra lead weight in there to balance the gun. This gun has, because of all this mechanism, all elevates continuously along with the gun, unlike a bag gun where only basically the gun and the slide and the housing elevate, is actually has a much heavier weight to be elevated. It's about 51 tons that actually elevates, even though the gun itself only weighs 16.7 tons, as opposed to a Baltimore-class heavy cruiser gun, which is about 29 tons that actually elevates.
Would have tore the Japanese up and the Germans as well.
Yeah, this ship with these guns defeats any other cruiser easily.
Yeah,
In fact, I wrote an article for Warship International. There was a guy asked a question. You know, the Salem portrayed the Graf Spee in the movie Pursuit of the Graf Spee or Battle of the River Plate in the English version. And he asked, okay, if you actually had the real Graf Spee versus the Salem, who would win? Well, the answer is the Salem would win very, very easily. For a whole bunch of reasons.
Well, I don't know about everyone here, but I found this very informative being a gunner's mate and having the references to development of different gun systems and how they progressed and how they went. And Dr. Scholes, fantastic. You are a go-to of information that I will, even as a gunner's mate, learn from, and I appreciate everything you do. I hope you all enjoyed it because it's fantastic. It's a weapon system that's in its own right, its own titan. And we appreciate all you do, John, for keeping people informed and teaching the history here and giving us this insight inside the history. And we hope you like, share, and subscribe to us here. And we will try to get you more information as we go through on different ships and gun systems here. So thank you very much. And again, thank you, Dr. Scholes. Appreciate all your hard work here, and hope to see you here in the future.
Fantastic. Well, we'll certainly be doing more. And if you're interested in more information on this gun, there is more information available online, both with the Inside the History program, and we'll be making additional videos explaining more about this system. Or if you really want the best experience, please come visit the U.S. Salem in Quincy, Massachusetts, and you'll be able to go inside the turret officer's booth and see all of this equipment for yourself. Well, thanks for all the people from the USS Massachusetts who came to help us out with this video and give us a chance to show off our 8H-55 rapid fire turret.
Also, we'd like to thank the crew and the people here at the USS Salem for the fine job they've done and presenting the ship in an outstanding form, and it takes a lot of hard work, and the volunteers all. Thank you, and keep up the good work, and we're backing you where we can, when we can. And you can also purchase combination tickets if you're in the area to see both Battleship Massachusetts and the ships at Battleship Cove and the Salem. Make a weekend trip of it. It's a great thing you can do, and use your time wisely. Be safe, have fun. Thank you very much for tuning in. We'll see you out there inside the history. Take care.